It was supposed to be a normal day. The kind of day you don't think twice about. A short trip, a simple plan, something routine. But sometimes, it's the ordinary moments that change everything. On the morning of December 7th, 2003, Daniel Morcombe left his home in Queensland, Australia. He was 13 years old. Quiet, polite, the kind of boy who didn't cause trouble, the kind of boy people trusted, the kind of boy who followed instructions and came back home on time. He was going to buy a gift, a simple errand, one that should have taken less than an hour. He walked to a bus stop, stood by the side of the road, waiting. Cars passed. Time moved forward. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would make anyone stop and look twice. At one point, a bus drove by, but it didn't stop. And that moment, that small, almost insignificant moment, would become one of the most important details in the entire case. Because if that bus had stopped, things might have been different. But it didn't. And after that, Daniel was never seen again. At first, there was confusion. Maybe he missed the bus. Maybe he changed plans. Maybe he went somewhere else. Maybe he decided to walk. Maybe there was a simple explanation, one that would make sense later. But as time passed, those possibilities began to fade, and concern took their place. His family knew something wasn't right. Daniel wasn't the type to disappear. He wasn't the type to wander off. He didn't ignore calls. He didn't stay out without saying something. So when he didn't come home, they acted quickly. Search efforts began. Police got involved. Volunteers joined in. People who didn't know him still showed up because something about the situation felt wrong. The area around the bus stop was examined carefully, repeatedly. Every inch of ground looked at more than once. But there was nothing. No signs of a struggle. No clear evidence. No direction to follow. Just an empty roadside and a missing boy. Witnesses came forward. Some reported seeing him, standing near the road, waiting, exactly where he was supposed to be. Others mentioned a car, a vehicle that seemed out of place. Something about it didn't feel right. But details were unclear, memories uncertain, and without something solid, the case began to slow. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. And slowly, the urgency began to shift. Not because people stopped caring, but because there was nothing new to follow. But the search didn't stop. His parents refused to let it fade. They spoke to the media, appealed to the public, repeated his name over and over again. Because they understood something important, that cases are only forgotten when people stop talking about them. And they refused to let that happen. They believed something else too, that someone, somewhere, knew something. Maybe they saw something that day. Maybe they heard something. Maybe they noticed something small and didn't realize it mattered. Years passed, and still, no answers. Birthdays came and went. Time moved forward. But the question never changed. What happened at that bus stop? For many cases, this is where things end. The trail goes cold, the story fades, and the world moves on. But this case didn't, because the people closest to it refused to let it. Investigators continued to review evidence, revisit leads, re-examine details, looking at the same pieces from different angles, hoping something would finally stand out. And then, years later, something changed. A new approach. Not traditional, not expected. Undercover officers posed as criminals. They created a scenario, a fake opportunity, a situation designed to attract someone who might know more than they should. It required patience, control, and time. A lot of time. Because operations like this don't work immediately. They build slowly, conversation by conversation, trust by trust. And eventually, it worked. A man came forward, not knowing who he was really speaking to, not realizing he was being recorded. At first, he was careful, measured, but over time, that changed. He began to talk, not directly, not all at once, but enough. Enough to raise suspicion, enough to connect dots, enough to build a case. His name was Brett Peter Cohen. And as investigators listened, the pieces began to fall into place. Details that hadn't been public, information that hadn't been released. Things only someone involved knew. And suddenly, after years of uncertainty, there was direction again. A path forward. Something real. He was arrested, charged. And for the first time, there was a real chance of answers. But even then, nothing was immediate. Legal processes take time. Evidence must be presented. Arguments must be made. Every detail must be examined. And throughout it all, Daniel's family waited. The same way they had waited for years. But this time, it was different. Because now there was something to hold on to. For truth. For clarity. For something that would finally explain what happened that day. During the trial, the details emerged. Not all at once, but gradually. A picture began to form of what likely happened after Daniel stood at that bus stop. And for those listening, it was difficult to process. Not because it was unclear, but because it was clear. The jury reached a verdict. Guilty. And with that, a chapter closed. But not completely. Because even with a conviction, some questions remain. Some details are never fully known. And for a family, that matters. Still, there was something else. A sense that the truth had not been lost. That the years of searching, of speaking, of refusing to give up had meant something. Because without that persistence, this story might have ended differently. It might have remained unsolved. Just another case without answers. But it didn't. Because people kept pushing, kept asking, kept believing that the truth was still there. And eventually, it was found. Even if it took years. Even if it came slowly. Even if it changed nothing about what had already happened. Daniel Morcombe never made it home that day. But his story didn't disappear. It stayed. In the minds of the public. In the efforts of investigators. In the voices of those who refused to forget. And that made the difference. Up to this date, Daniel Morcombe's name is remembered, not just as a case, but as a story of persistence, of a family that refused to stop searching, of a community that didn't forget. Because in the end, it wasn't just about what happened, it was about making sure it was never ignored. And maybe that's what stays with people the most. Not just the loss, but the determination that followed it. Because some stories don't fade with time. They stay as reminders that even in the face of uncertainty, truth can still be found. And that sometimes the longest journeys are the ones that finally lead to it.
And that's where this story leaves us. This is Global Shadows. Subscribe and stay with the story.